In 2010, Dag Kittlaus received a phone call from Steve Jobs. He was proposing a deal to buy the first true automated virtual personal assistant that Kittlaus says he had built for $200 million. That was Siri. Kittlaus agreed to Jobs' proposal, and Siri became the launchpad for an onslaught of voice assistant technology. Today, between Kittlaus' Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, over 50% of U.S. households use intelligent assistants. And Kittlaus didn't stop with Apple. He is continuing to lead the voice revolution as CEO and co-founder of Viv Labs, the AI company behind Samsung's BIXBY, which just opened to third-party developers. I sat down with Kittlaus to talk about Steve Jobs and the future of voice technology. Take a listen.
It started out with a phone call. He literally called me out of the blue and said, "We love what you're doing, and could you come over to my house tomorrow? I'd love to talk about it with you."
Did you fall out of your chair, or?
A little bit. It's not the normal startup routine to 2 weeks after you launch your first app on the App Store to have Steve Jobs call you and invite you over to his house. But yeah, we were flattered, but we were very interested to see what they wanted to say.
So you went?
We went.
You met with him?
Yep.
What happened?
So we had about like a 3-hour discussion in front of his fireplace. We were putting our feet up there and chatting about the future. So he was convincing us that they were going to win the smartphone wars, and that if we call it throwing in together, that we could really build a new way to interact with devices, especially the iPhone.
Now, at the time, a number of different companies were trying to buy Siri, correct?
Yeah, we had offers previously, but we weren't really ready to sell. So it was, when Steve calls, and every technologist wants to take what they're working on, their baby, and go big with it. So that was a pretty hard thing to refuse. But we did decide, it was a long process. So, he called me like 37 days in a row. He was calling me at midnight.
Wow.
And yeah, so he was very involved and engaged in getting Siri to be a part of Apple.
So that's what you mean when you say relentless?
Yes.
You did a deal with him, and then you went on to develop with him. What was that like?
Yeah, he was very, very active in this. So we met every week and went through, what do we want Siri to do, for the first instantiation at Apple. But it was fun to work with somebody like him, that's so detail-oriented, that had a very strong opinion about what it should do, and we had a lot of good debates about it. But
what was his vision, and how did it jive with your vision?
Well, the first thing he wanted to do that was different from what we were already doing was to make it really revolve around all the basic everyday use cases, calling and messaging and reminders, and some of the things that you saw from the first version of Siri. We also agreed that eventually we wanted to get into a lot more things like conversational commerce, so the ability to buy, book, and reserve things, and take things that were previously much harder to do with your phone, and because you can just use your voice to do it, make it much easier.
There's a funny story about Steve saying to Siri, "Are you a man or a woman?" What's your answer to the question of Siri's gender?
So Siri's actually genderless. Even though the name Siri in Norwegian means beautiful woman that leads you to victory, we decided deliberately not to make it one gender or another, and rather to have it be sort of a persona that's there to help you.
So, and you're right, you can choose male voices as well, right, as the default. Siri was first integrated into the iPhone 4S. Now we're up to the iPhone XS. Has it lived up to your expectations?
Well, so on the positive side, it's gotten a lot faster. The speech recognition got a lot better. I would have liked to see Siri evolve to doing more things, so have greater capabilities to become a bigger part of your life, merely because it's doing so many more things for you. That was really the genesis for the idea for the next company that we started, was how do we make it go from, not a novelty, but a basic sort of utility in your life to something much bigger, a paradigm in itself that's, you're really relying on and use in your everyday world.
So why do you think Siri hasn't gotten there? Is it Apple's fault?
To some extent, but I think they just had a different focus than where we started it originally.
would you have liked to see Apple do differently?
I would like to have seen them open up to a third-party ecosystem much earlier. That's something that we're doing now. We think that that's sort of the big missing piece, that if you look at something like the App Store is a perfect metaphor for this. So the iPhone actually launched in 2007 with just a few Apple apps on it, weather and some very basic things. But when the App Store opened and sort of unleashed the creativity of the developers around the world, that changed the world.
Now, you took the rare step of selling your next startup, Viv, to Samsung, and not a major U.S. tech company. Why?
So one of the big focus for us in the Viv world was ubiquity. And when you look at the fact that Samsung sells 500 million devices a year of all different types, we saw an opportunity to take our technology and really put it in a place where it could affect many millions of people around the world, lots of different contexts, different types of devices. Just the sheer scale that Samsung has is just an ideal platform.
You just reintroduced BIXBY, Samsung's AI voice assistant, to Samsung's developers.
Yeah.
What makes you think that BIXBY can compete with Apple and Amazon and Google at this point?
Well, so one of the points I made at the talk yesterday was that people don't remember this, but Google was actually the 14th search engine to enter the market. So I think we're still in a chapter 1 or not barely even reading the introduction to this story. So I don't believe that there's a timing issue here. What we want to do is really gain momentum and get the world of developers in sort of an app store-like way, but bring that to AI. And when you have 1,000 things that you can do with an assistant, it becomes a much more important part of your day.
So when it comes to assistants, do you think we'll end up relying on just one or two, as with Google, just one? Or do you see us using many assistants in the future?
I think that ultimately it's going to boil down to a few, but I think you'll see minor assistants that will specialize in some things be a part of that game. But I think ultimately, because it requires it to become such an important part of your life, all the personalization, everything that it learns about you, your habits, your preferences, I think that ultimately people will use one far more than others. So I do think it becomes more like the search market.
Do you see this being integrated into washing machines and refrigerators, and what does that world look like?
It's already happening. So you'll actually see that sooner rather than later out of Samsung. Yeah. Within a few years, BIXBY will be on 1 billion devices. And that's just in Samsung, and then we're going to open it up to other third-party hardware as well.
What do you say to the people who think these listening devices are creepy? And, maybe they don't want it in their living room.
They don't have
and they
to buy
don't trust Apple and Amazon and Google and Samsung not to listen to them when they don't want them to be listening.
I would say don't buy them. But the actual, the reality is that all the companies that I've been associated with take the privacy and security aspect of this very seriously. So people have asked me, so is my Alexa listening to me, or my HomePod, or my BIXBY? The answer is no. It's listening for what's called a wake word. And the wake word is, the thing that lets it know that you're ready to tell it something, to give it some sort of a command. But, I'd say the bigger risk is, yes, there's some security concerns when your whole house is full of devices that could possibly listen in. There's security risk with hackers or somebody, breaking in, but it's not with the companies themselves. There's no sort of behind-the-scenes conspiracy to listen in on what everyone's doing.